Take the ring off, right now. The manager's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold, in the most luxurious jewelry store on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. 2 large security guards had already closed in on either side of her. Dozens of well-dressed eyes turned in unison toward the young woman standing frozen in the middle of the polished expanse. Josephine Mercer, an apprentice jeweler who less than 3 minutes earlier had still been smiling at the diamond glittering on her hand, the ring she had spent 2 full years saving for, dollar by dollar. The ring with her mother's date of death engraved inside. The ring that carried a promise made by a 12-year-old child at a hospital bedside. Her small fingers wrapped around her mother's hand as it slowly grew cold. I will survive. I will buy myself a diamond. But Vivian Ashford didn't need to know any of that. She only needed to know one thing, that this girl didn't belong here. I've checked the system. There's no order under your name, she said, her thin lips curving into a brittle smile. This ring belongs to a VIP client. Call the police. Theft of jewelry over $50,000 is a felony. Josie was blissfully unaware that the ground beneath her feet was already being dismantled. Mrs. Ashford hadn't left this encounter to chance. She had been waiting for the perfect moment to settle a debt that Josie didn't even know she owed. Yet there was something Mrs. Ashford didn't know either. The diamond ring on Josie's hand carried a secret inscription engraved along the inner band. A line of words Josie herself had never read, placed there by a man whose name made the entire New York underworld tremble, and that man was on his way. But to understand why this moment could destroy, or redeem, the life of Josephine Mercer, we must return to the beginning, to a 12-year-old orphan, a cheap silver ring, and a promise that was never allowed to be forgotten. If you're drawn to stories that reach straight into the heart, press like and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what happens next will make it impossible for you to look away. Brooklyn Public Hospital, 15 years ago. The smell of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, mingling with the faint scent of cheap vinyl from the curtain dividing the hospital beds. 12-year-old Josie Mercer sat on a plastic chair too tall for her small frame, her feet dangling above the floor, never quite touching it, her eyes fixed on her mother's hand resting on the white sheet. That hand had once been warm. It had held hers every morning on the walk to school. It had smoothed her hair back every night before bed, but now it was cold. So cold that Josie wrapped both of her hands around it and still couldn't press enough warmth back into it. Eleanor Mercer was 34 years old, yet she looked past 50. Cancer had eaten away at everything, from her glossy brown hair to the flush in her cheeks, from her clear voice to the strength that once let her rise easily from a bed. She didn't have good insurance. She didn't have the money for proper treatment. What she had was a damp ground-floor apartment, a 12-year-old daughter, and a thin silver ring on her ring finger that she had worn since the day Josie was born. The ring wasn't worth $10. Its surface had dulled. Its edges had tarnished. But Eleanor had never taken it off. Josie. Her mother's voice was so weak that Josie had to lean in close just to hear it. Listen to me. I'm listening, Mom. Josie swallowed her sob and tightened her grip on her mother's hand. Eleanor smiled, and there was something unbearably cruel about that smile. Because it was still beautiful, still warm, still the smile Josie loved most in the world, even as it appeared on the face of someone about to leave forever. Slowly, she slipped the silver ring from her finger. It took nearly a full minute, because her finger had grown so thin, the ring almost slid free on its own. Then she placed it in Josie's palm and folded her daughter's tiny fingers over it. This ring isn't worth much, Eleanor said, her voice barely more than a breath, yet each word was clear, as if she were pouring the last of her strength into every syllable. But you're worth more than anything in this world, Josie. You deserve to wear beautiful things. You deserve to live a beautiful life. Promise me that one day you'll buy yourself a diamond, with your own money, with your own strength, so you can look at it and remember that you did it. Josie didn't fully understand the weight of those words. At 12, she only understood that her mother was saying goodbye, and that her heart was breaking into pieces so small she could hardly breathe. I promise, Josie said, her voice trembling so badly the word promise almost disappeared. I promise, Mom. Eleanor smiled one last time. Her fingers tightened faintly around Josie's hand, then loosened. And just like that, gently, without drama, without a single loud cry, Eleanor Mercer was gone, like a candle blown out by the wind, quiet, simple, and merciless. Josie didn't scream. She didn't call for a nurse. She sat there, clutching the silver ring to her chest with both hands, watching her mother's face slowly lose the final traces of life, and she wept in silence. She cried until the nurse came into the room. She cried until they gently pulled her hand away from her mother's. She cried until there were no tears left. But she didn't let go of the ring. Not ever. That night, in the hollow apartment where her mother's voice no longer echoed, 12-year-old Josie Mercer lay curled on her bed, the silver ring clenched tight in her fist, and whispered into the dark, "I'll survive, Mom. I'll buy that diamond." She didn't know that it would take 15 years to keep that promise. She didn't know that the road ahead would be lined with hunger, with loneliness, with doors slammed shut in her face. And she certainly didn't know that 15 years later, when she finally kept her word, when that diamond rested on her hand, someone would call her a thief in the most luxurious jewelry store in Manhattan. But we'll come to that. First, we have to talk about what happens to a 12-year-old child when the last person in the world who loves her is gone. 3 months after her mother died, her father came home. Not to stay. Richard Mercer stepped into the apartment with bloodshot eyes that carried the sour scent of alcohol, stuffed a few changes of clothes into a duffel bag, and looked at his daughter standing in the kitchen doorway with the expression of a man staring at a burden, not at a child. He didn't apologize. He didn't say he'd come back. He only said, "I can't take care of you," then walked out, and the sound of the door closing behind him was the last sound Josie ever heard from her father. She was 12 years old, standing in the middle of an empty apartment, one hand gripping the silver ring in her coat pocket, and she understood that from that moment on, she was completely alone in the world. The foster care system took Josie in 2 weeks later. The first home was with the Pattersons in Queens, a small house already crowded with 3 other children. Mrs. Patterson collected a stipend for each child, but there was never quite enough food on the table. Josie quickly learned that the slowest hand went hungry, and she was usually the slowest because she didn't know how to fight for her share. At night, she lay on a thin mattress spread across the floor, her stomach growling with hunger, her hand wrapped around the silver ring hidden inside her sock. She kept it there because the oldest boy in the house, a 14-year-old named Craig, had a habit of going through the belongings of the new arrivals. The ring wasn't worth money, but it was the only thing Josie owned, and she'd rather miss another meal than lose it. 7 months later, Josie was moved to a second family. The Whitfields on Staten Island, a middle-aged couple with no children, a tidy house, a refrigerator that was always full. For the first time in nearly a year, Josie ate until she was full. Mrs. Whitfield cooked breakfast every morning. Mr. Whitfield drove her to school. Josie began to think that maybe, just maybe, this place could be home. She lived there for 6 months. Then one afternoon, Mrs. Whitfield sat down beside her on the sofa, gently took her hand, and said in the softest voice she could manage, "Josie, we care about you very much, but we feel we can't quite connect with you. You haven't done anything wrong. It's just that we're not the right family for you." Josie didn't cry. She simply nodded, went to her room, slipped the silver ring back into her sock, and packed her clothes into a bag. She had known for a long time, no one stays. That was the rule of her life, and each time it repeated, it hurt a little less. The way skin cut over and over in the same place begins to harden. It doesn't stop hurting. You just stop recognizing the pain. Josie left the foster care system at 17. No family wanted to take her in anymore, and she didn't want to be taken in. She rented a room no bigger than a matchbox in the Bronx, washed dishes at an Italian restaurant during the day, waited tables at a bar in the East Village at night, and after midnight, when the city finally slept, she sat on the floor of her rented room beneath the weak yellow glow of a desk lamp and taught herself to draw. Josie drew jewelry. She didn't know why she was drawn to the delicate lines of rings and bracelets and pendants. Maybe it was because of her mother's silver ring. Maybe it was because jewelry is small but carries enormous meaning, like a promise, like a memory, like love compressed into something that fits in the palm of your hand. She sketched hundreds of designs on sheets of paper, rescued from the trash behind a copy shop. And she was good. Good enough that when she submitted her portfolio to apply for a scholarship to an art school, the admissions committee couldn't believe that a 19-year-old with no formal training could draw like that. But she could. And she was accepted. 4 years later, Josie graduated with honors. On commencement day, she stood alone in a sea of students embracing their parents, her diploma in one hand, the other holding the silver ring now strung on a chain hidden beneath her blouse, and whispered, I'm on the right path, Mom. The silver ring was no longer hidden in a sock. It rested on a slender chain around Josie's neck, tucked beneath her clothing, where it touched her skin every second, like a second heartbeat. And the man who opened the first door for Josie into the world of high jewelry was a 78-year-old named Laurent, the founding owner of Ashford and Laurent, the most prestigious jewelry house on the Upper East Side. He studied Josie's portfolio for 3 minutes, looked up at her for 3 seconds, then said, "You start Monday. Workshop in the back. Apprentice." Josie didn't smile. She didn't gush with thanks. She simply nodded and said, "I won't disappoint you." And she didn't. In 2 years working in the back workshop of Ashford and Laurent, Josie designed dozens of pieces worn by elite clients who never once knew the hands that had created them. She arrived first and left last, and she never set foot in the front showroom. The front belonged to Mrs. Vivian Ashford, the manager, and from her first day, Josie learned that in Mrs. Ashford's eyes, she was only a backroom girl, unworthy of sharing space with customers who carried Hermès bags and wore Patek Philippe watches. Josie didn't care. She hadn't come here for recognition. She had come to keep a promise. And for 15 years, Josie Mercer lived by one rule. She doesn't need anyone. She doesn't rely on anyone. She doesn't owe anyone. That rule had carried her through everything. Until one afternoon, when the workshop door opened, and everything she believed began to crack. That afternoon began with the sharp strike of Mrs. Ashford's heels against the opulent stone, rapid and relentless, like gunfire echoing down a narrow hall. She burst into the back workshop without knocking, her face flushed, her eyes sweeping over the 3 jewelers at their benches, before landing squarely on Josie. "A VIP client needs a pocket watch repaired. Very valuable, very old. No one out front dares to take it." She spoke quickly, her voice stretched tight as a wire about to snap. Josie looked up from her work table. "What do you mean no one dares?" "I mean if someone damages it, that person will be fully responsible, Mrs." Ashford held Josie's gaze, and that look said more than any words could. "If it breaks, it's your fault. If it succeeds, the credit belongs to the store." Josie understood the rules. She always did. She rose, slipped on her white jeweler's coat, and for the first time in 2 years stepped out into the front showroom. She sensed something different the moment she crossed the threshold. The air in the showroom felt heavier than usual. 2 sales associates stood stiffly against the wall, back straight, eyes lowered. A large man in a black suit stood near the entrance, hands folded in front of him in the way Josie had only seen in films, the posture of someone always ready to draw something from inside his jacket. A second man stood near the glass counter. Same stance, same suit, same restless, scanning eyes. And between them, beside the central display case, stood a man unlike anyone Josie had ever seen. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, dark hair slicked back to reveal features cut sharp as a blade. A faint scar traced along his left jaw, not diminishing his appearance but marking him as something that had passed through violence and endured, something you wouldn't want to touch and yet couldn't look away from. "Mrs." Ashford stood at his side, bent nearly in half, her voice a stream of, "Yes, sir," and "Of course, sir," spoken in a tone Josie had never heard her use with anyone. Josie approached. "Mrs." Ashford turned, jerking her chin toward her with a mixture of disdain and relief. "This is our jeweler. She'll examine the watch for you." The man turned his head and looked at Josie. She felt that gaze like a physical force, heavy, cold, penetrating. His dark eyes held no expression, assessing her in silence the way a predator decides whether what stands before it is a threat. Josie didn't lower her head. She didn't greet him with "sir." She simply met his eyes and said, "Let me see the watch." Something flickered across his face. Not anger, not irritation. Surprise. The surprise of a man accustomed to fear who suddenly encounters someone who isn't afraid. He opened a black velvet box on the counter, and Josie saw the pocket watch. It was beautiful in the way antiques are beautiful. Ivory enamel dial, gold hands, a silver case engraved with intricate detail, but the mechanism inside had failed. Josie lifted it, and in that instant, she felt the weight not only of metal but of history, of memory, of something sacred. She turned it over, opened the back, and read the inscription engraved inside. "For my son, who will carry our name, MC." Josie's hand paused. She looked at the words, then at the man. He was watching her read them, and for the first time the cold mask on his face cracked, only briefly, but long enough for Josie to understand. This isn't just a watch, it's his father's keepsake, and she was holding his heart in the palm of her hand. Josie asked nothing more. She pulled the magnifying lamp closer, took out her tools, and began working right there at the counter. Her hands moved slowly, precisely, with a gentleness so careful it was almost invisible. She adjusted the internal mechanism with the caution of someone handling something that could shatter at any moment. Not the watch itself, but the meaning it carried. 15 minutes passed. The room was silent. Mrs. Ashford shifted anxiously in the distance. The 2 bodyguards remained motionless, and the man stood there, watching Josie's hands, saying nothing. When she set the watch down and closed the cover, the steady ticking filled the quiet space. It was running again, perfectly. Josie slid it back toward him. "It's done. The mechanism is original. I didn't replace any parts. I only adjusted it. It deserves to remain as it was." He picked up the watch, turned it over, listened to the ticking. Then he looked at Josie and spoke his first words since she'd stepped into the room. "You're the first person to hold it that I wasn't worried about." His voice was low, measured, warmer than she'd expected. Josie didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded, turned, and walked back to the workshop. She didn't know his name, not yet, but she felt his gaze following her until the workshop door closed behind her. His name was Sawyer Castellano. Josie learned that the next day when Mrs. Ashford spoke to the staff in hushed, reverent tones. The Castellano family, a name even those untouched by the underworld knew and feared. Josie listened, and she understood why the air had felt so heavy when he entered. A week later, Sawyer returned. Not for the watch. He brought a cup of hot coffee and set it on Josie's workbench at 9 o'clock at night while she was working late. Josie looked at the coffee, then at him standing in the doorway. "I didn't ask anyone to buy me coffee." "I know," Sawyer said. Then he turned and left without another word. The coffee sat on her bench. Josie didn't drink it, but she didn't throw it away either. The following week, he returned. Another coffee, 9 o'clock at night, placed quietly on her bench. He left again when she refused, and the week after that, Josie refused every time. He left it every time. No pressure, no questions, no explanations. Sawyer Castellano, the man whose name made the New York underworld tremble, had never returned to any place for anyone, until now. It happened on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after Sawyer Castellano first walked into the store. Josie was working late as usual, finishing a necklace a client expected to receive the next morning. The clock was nearing 10 at night when she removed her white coat, switched off the desk lamp, and stepped into the narrow back hallway that led to the employee exit. The corridor was long and tight, fluorescent lights flickering a sickly yellow against white brick walls. Josie had walked that hallway hundreds of times without fear. But that night, as she turned the corner, she stopped short. Brody Ashford was leaning against the wall beside the exit door, arms folded across his chest, head tilted slightly, a smile curving his mouth in a way Josie immediately recognized as the grin of a man who had drunk enough to be bold, but not enough to fall down. His white shirt sleeves were rolled up, his tie loosened, and the smell of whiskey radiated from him so strongly she could detect it 3 steps away. Josie Mercer. Brody said her name slowly, savoring each syllable as if tasting it. "Working late again. Who's so diligent?" Josie didn't slow. She kept walking toward the door, intending to slip past him without a word. But Brody shifted sideways, blocking the path, not completely, just enough that she'd have to stop or brush against him to get by. "Why the rush?" he murmured, lowering his voice. He stepped closer. Josie stepped back, her spine nearly touching the wall. "I need to leave. Move." Her tone was even, but inside, every nerve was taut. She knew Brody Ashford, the manager's son, 30 years old, indulged since childhood, accustomed to receiving whatever he wanted, especially used to looking at female employees with the kind of gaze Josie had come to despise. He'd never cornered her like this before. But in recent weeks, ever since Sawyer began appearing at the store, Josie had noticed Brody looking at her differently, longer, with something in his stare that mixed desire with resentment. "You know," Brody said, his voice thick with alcohol yet deliberate in every word. "I've been watching you for a long time. Since your first day. A girl like you. No family. No one protecting you. No one who even wanted to keep you. The last sentence struck Josie like a blow. He knew about her years in foster care. Someone had told him, or he'd gone digging, and he wielded it like a weapon. Brody stepped closer still. His whiskey-soaked breath washed over her face. You should be grateful someone notices you, Josie. Not everyone looks at you the way I do. Out there, you're nobody. But in here, if you play nice, I could help you. My mother listens to me. One word from me, you're out front, meeting VIP clients, moving up. Or one word from me, you're out of a job. He lifted a hand and brushed a single finger along the edge of her hair. Light. Slow. And in that instant, something inside Josie detonated. She didn't scream. She didn't retreat. She struck him. Her right hand swung with the full force of a girl who'd learned to defend herself at 12 years old, with the full fury of 15 years of being dismissed, abandoned, underestimated, condensed into one single slap. The crack echoed down the empty hallway. Brody's head snapped to the side. A red mark bloomed across his cheek almost immediately. Silence followed. Brody lifted his hand to his face slowly, as if unable to comprehend what had just happened. Then he looked at Josie, and his eyes changed completely. No more lust, no more condescension, only raw humiliation. The humiliation of a man accustomed to indulgence who had just been struck across the face by someone he considered beneath him. His eyes burned, his jaw tightened, his voice hissed through clenched teeth. You're going to regret this, Mercer. I swear. At the far end of the hallway, pressed against the corner, a sales associate named Kelly stood frozen, clutching her purse, eyes wide. She had seen everything. Josie saw her, and Kelly saw Josie, and in that brief exchange, there was an understanding between two women that required no words. Josie said nothing more. She stepped past Brody, pushed open the door, and disappeared into the New York night. Brody remained alone in the hallway for another 10 minutes, his hand still resting on his cheek, before pulling out his phone and making a call. The person who answered was his mother. That Mercer girl, Brody said, his voice shaking with rage. She slapped me, in front of another employee. Silence on the other end. Then Mrs. Ashford's voice, slow and frighteningly composed. Tell me exactly what happened. Brody told his version, not the truth. He omitted the part where he blocked her path, the part where he touched her, the threats. In Brody's account, he had only been speaking politely, and Josie had suddenly slapped him for no reason. Mrs. Ashford listened without interrupting for a full 30 seconds. 30 unusually long seconds. Then she said, I've tried to fire that girl 3 times. Each time Mr. Laurent protected her. But Mr. Laurent won't be here forever. So what are you going to do? Nothing yet. It's not the right moment. She'll give me an opportunity herself. People like her always do. Mrs. Ashford paused, then added in a voice so gentle it was chilling, Leave it to me. That night, Josie returned to her rented room and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her right hand still stinging from the slap. She didn't regret it. She would never regret defending herself. But she also knew, with the survival instinct honed over 15 years, that Brody Ashford wasn't the type to let something like that go. She just didn't know that the slap had set into motion a trap that would nearly destroy her entire life. A week after the slap, Sawyer still came, still the cup of coffee, still 9 o'clock at night. But this time, he didn't set the cup on her bench and leave. He pulled out the chair across from Josie's work table and sat down, silent, watching her hands as she worked. Josie didn't tell him to go. She didn't try to start a conversation either. They existed in the same room like 2 planets in orbit, not yet close enough to collide, but no longer strangers drifting in separate skies. And on the night everything changed, Josie was finishing a white gold hairpin when she realized she'd left her specialized pliers in the storage room at the end of the hall. She rose, stepped out of the workshop, and walked down the dim corridor. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Her footsteps were soft against the tile. As she passed the employee break room, she heard Sawyer's voice. The door was slightly ajar. A thin blade of light cut across the dark hallway floor. Sawyer was on the phone, and the voice Josie had begun to associate with the low warmth of, "You're the first person to hold it that I wasn't worried about," was gone. In its place was the voice of someone else entirely. Cold, measured, each word chosen with the precision of a man who knows exactly how much weight his words carry. Tell Donovan he has 48 hours. Not 48 hours to think, 48 hours to pay, in full, not a cent short. Silence. Sawyer listened to the response on the other end. Then he continued, his tone dropping another degree, so low it was almost a whisper, but the kind of whisper that makes the hair rise along the back of your neck. I don't care what Donovan thinks. I don't care if he has a family, kids, a dog. Tell him the last time I went to see someone in person to talk about money, that person didn't want me to come a second time, and that person isn't in a position to want anything anymore. Josie stood frozen in the dark corridor. Her feet felt rooted to the tile, her hands curled into fists, nails biting into her palms without her noticing the pain. Inside the break room, Sawyer continued speaking, never raising his voice, never sounding angry, and that was what made it terrifying. He didn't threaten with rage. He threatened with calm, with the voice of a man so accustomed to ordering violence that it had become routine, like checking email or reading the morning paper. Paxton will see him tomorrow. If the money isn't back by tomorrow night, I won't send Paxton again. I'll go myself. And Pax, tell me honestly, do you want me to have to go? A hurried, anxious reply came through the line. Sawyer answered with a single word. Good. Then he ended the call. Josie stepped back. One step, then another. Slow, careful, making no sound. She turned, walked back to the workshop, grabbed her bag, and left through the side exit. She didn't retrieve the pliers. She didn't turn off her desk lamp. She just left, moving as quickly as she could without running, because if she started running, she wasn't sure she'd stop. On the way back to her rented room, her hand clutched the silver ring beneath her blouse, and she heard her mother's voice echoing from 15 years ago. You deserve a beautiful life. A beautiful life. Not a life tied to a man who spoke about violence in a tone as ordinary as the weather forecast. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark, eyes wide open, replaying Sawyer's words over and over. That person didn't want me to come a second time. The meaning was clear without explanation, and frightening without exaggeration. The next morning, Josie arrived at the store early as always. She walked straight into the workshop without greeting anyone, but as she passed the showroom, she glanced through the glass and saw Brody Ashford. He was speaking with an employee, but something was different. Brody wore a long-sleeved shirt despite the warm weather, and his right hand was wrapped in white bandages from wrist to near his elbow. His face was paler than usual, dark circles under his eyes, and what made Josie slow her step was his gaze. He wasn't looking anyone in the eye. His eyes stayed lowered, his shoulders slightly hunched, the entire posture of the arrogant bully replaced by the wary stillness of an animal that had just learned exactly where it stands in the food chain. Josie looked at the bandaged hand, looked at the drained face, and she understood. She didn't need confirmation. She didn't need proof. She knew what had happened to Brody Ashford between last night and this morning, and she knew who had done it. At noon, Sawyer came to the store. He stepped into the workshop as usual, placed the cup of coffee on her bench as usual. But this time, Josie lifted her eyes to him. She looked directly into his face, and in her gaze was a question she didn't have to speak aloud. Sawyer read it. He looked away. For the first time since they had met, Sawyer Castellano was the one who broke eye contact first. He didn't explain. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He simply stood there for a few seconds more, then turned and walked out. Josie watched him go, her hand wrapped tight around the silver ring against her chest, her heart torn between two emotions that refused to reconcile. Gratitude, because he had protected her in a way no one ever had, and fear, because the way he protected her belonged to violence, to the underworld, to a world her mother would never have wanted her to touch. From that day on, Josie stopped speaking to Sawyer. The coffee he left on her bench remained untouched. When he came, she stood and walked out. When he called her name, she pretended not to hear. 2 weeks passed like that, 14 days of silence heavier than any argument. And Sawyer Castellano, the man who ruled the largest underground empire in New York, the man whose single nod could decide the fate of an entire neighborhood, found himself for the first time in his life not knowing what to do. On the 15th night since Josie stopped speaking to Sawyer, the New York sky opened, as if it meant to drown the entire city. Rain lashed against the windows in relentless sheets. Josie sat alone in the workshop, the pale yellow glow of her desk lamp falling over an unfinished sketch, but her hand didn't move. She sat there listening to the rain strike the glass and thinking about the things she didn't want to think about. About Sawyer's cold voice on the phone that night, about Brody's bandaged hand, about the cup of coffee that still appeared every evening at 9, which she no longer touched but also never threw away until it had gone cold, and she dropped the empty paper cup into the trash before leaving. 11 o'clock. Josie was about to switch off the light when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, steady, familiar. A shadow filled the doorway. Sawyer Castellano stood there, soaked from head to toe. His dark hair clung to his forehead. His charcoal gray suit was drenched, the fabric plastered to his shoulders and arms. The faint scar along his left jaw gleamed under the fluorescent light. He looked as though he had walked a long way in the rain. And perhaps he had, because a man with a private driver and armored vehicles has no reason to arrive this wet unless he chooses to be, unless he needs the distance of a long walk in the rain to decide what he's going to say. "You're avoiding me," Sawyer said. Not a question. A statement. His voice was low, tired, stripped of the steel she'd grown used to hearing. Josie set her pencil down and looked at him. 15 days without meeting his eyes. And now that she did, she saw something she hadn't expected. Sawyer Castellano, the Mafia boss New York feared, was standing in front of her with the eyes of a man who doesn't yet know what he's losing, but knows he's losing something. "I heard your call," Josie said plainly. No softness, no detour. That night. About Donovan. About 48 hours. About the last time you went to see someone and that person didn't want you to come a second time. Sawyer didn't blink. He didn't step back. He didn't deny it. He stood there, rainwater dripping from his hair onto the tile floor, forming a small dark pool around his shoes, and said, "Yes," one word, no explanation, no defense. "And Brody," Josie continued, her voice trembling but not with fear, his hand, "that was you." "Yes." Silence stretched between them, heavier than the storm outside. Then Sawyer spoke again, slowly, and for the first time she heard something in his voice she'd never heard before. Not coldness, not power, but the brutal honesty of a man who knows exactly what he is. "I'm a dangerous man, Josie. My world is violent. I've done things that, if you knew them, you wouldn't stand in the same room with me. You don't belong in that world. You shouldn't be near me." Josie swallowed. Her heart was racing, but she didn't look away. "Then why do you keep coming? Every night, the coffee, every week, even when I don't drink it, even when I don't speak. Why do you keep coming?" Sawyer met her gaze, and this time, the mask didn't just crack. It fell. The eyes she'd seen silence a room, the eyes that ordered violence with calm restraint, now looked at her with the helplessness of a man who has surrendered to something he can't control. "Because I don't know how to stop," he said softly, almost a whisper. "I've tried. I tell myself every night it's the last time. Then the next night, I'm standing outside this store with a cup of coffee in my hand like an idiot. I don't know how to stop, Josie. Not with you." The rain hammered the windows. The fluorescent lights flickered. And in that moment, Josie looked at Sawyer Castellano and didn't see a mafia boss. She didn't see a killer. She didn't see danger. She saw a man standing soaked in the middle of the night, telling her the truth because she deserved the truth, even if the truth was ugly. And maybe it was that brutal honesty that melted something in her chest she had kept locked in stone for 15 years. She reached up to her neck and pulled the thin silver chain from beneath her blouse. The small, tarnished silver ring lay in her palm under the yellow light. Sawyer looked at the ring, then at her. He didn't ask. He waited. "My mother gave me this," Josie said, and her voice shifted. Softer, thinner. The voice of a 12-year-old speaking through the mouth of a 27-year-old woman. "Before she died, at Brooklyn Public Hospital. 4 beds to a room. Plastic curtains. The smell of antiseptic. She took it off her finger, put it in my hand, and told me I deserved to wear beautiful things. She made me promise that one day I'd buy myself a diamond, with my own money, with my own strength." Josie closed her fingers around the silver ring. "I was 12, I promised, and she died right after." Sawyer said nothing. He stepped into the workshop, pulled out the chair, and sat across from her. Water dripped from his clothes onto the floor. He didn't wipe it away. He didn't move. He just sat there and listened with the full attention of a man who understands that what he's being given isn't the ring, but the story behind it. "After that, my father left," Josie continued, her eyes dry, her voice steady. She had cried all the tears this story would ever demand. Foster care, 2 families. No one kept me. I was on my own at 17, and for 15 years, every night, I hold this ring and remind myself I'll keep my promise. I'll buy that diamond. Not because I need jewelry, but because it proves I survived. She looked up at him. That's why I'm here. In this store. Doing this work. Everything I do leads back to that ring. Silence. The rain outside softened to a distant murmur. Sawyer sat very still, looking at the small silver ring in her hand, at the clear blue steadiness of her eyes, and something inside him, something he thought had died the day his father was shot, something buried beneath 14 years of darkness, stirred. It hurt, and it was warm. You'll have that diamond, Josie, Sawyer said. His voice was low, certain, not an empty promise, but the declaration of a man accustomed to turning words into reality at any cost. You deserve it. Josie didn't answer. She just looked at him. And between them, in the narrow workshop filled with the scent of metal and polishing solution, in the rain-soaked New York night, something began that neither of them could stop. That night, after Josie locked the workshop door and Sawyer disappeared into the black SUV waiting in the alley, he sat in the back seat, pulled out his phone, and made a call. The man who answered was the finest jeweler the Castellano family had ever employed. Sawyer spoke only one sentence. I need you to do something for me. Absolute secrecy. Josie didn't know about that call. She didn't know that the night she opened her heart to the most dangerous man in New York was the same night he decided she would have a diamond greater than anything she'd ever dared to imagine. After the night of rain, everything between Josie and Sawyer shifted. Not in a loud way. Not in the way of holding hands beneath city lights or whispered dates over candlelit tables. It changed in the quiet language of two people who had never been taught how to be loved. Sawyer still came every evening. The coffee still appeared on her bench. But now Josie drank it. She drank in silence while he sat across from her in silence. And that silence was no longer a wall but a bridge. A way of saying, I'm here. I'm not leaving. You don't have to explain anything more. During that time, Josie began to carry out the plan she had nurtured for 2 years. She placed an order for a diamond ring through Ashford and Laurent itself, the very store where she worked. She chose the simplest design, a platinum band, a round solitaire diamond of 1.5 carats. Inside the band, engraved, a sequence of numbers that to anyone else would mean nothing, but to Josie marked the date her mother died. The price of the ring equaled nearly 10 months of an apprentice's salary. Josie didn't borrow. She didn't take a loan. She didn't accept a single dollar from anyone. She had saved coin by coin for 2 years, cutting away every unnecessary expense, bringing packed lunches instead of buying food, walking 30 minutes to work instead of taking the subway, wearing the same 3 outfits until the fabric thinned like paper. Every dollar she placed into her savings account was a small step back toward the promise made at a hospital bedside 15 years ago. And now, at last, she had enough. Josie placed the order through the store's internal system, entered her name, selected the specifications, confirmed the payment. She followed every procedure correctly, kept the confirmation email and the bank transfer receipt. She told no one, not even Sawyer. This wasn't a gift from anyone. It was her promise to her mother, and she would keep it with her own hands. But Sawyer knew. He knew because he was Sawyer Castellano, and nothing moved within the sphere of what he cared about without his knowledge. He knew she'd ordered the ring. He knew the design. He knew the engraving. He knew the meaning woven through every detail. And the night after Josie placed the order, he called the master jeweler he'd contacted on the night of rain, the finest craftsman the Castellano family had ever employed. And he said, the ring she ordered, 1.5 carats, raise it to 2, highest quality, no additional charge. She can't know there's any difference. He paused, and his voice shifted, softer, as if he were speaking something so private it unsettled even him. And engrave another line inside the band, opposite the date, 3 words, you survived, period, and the letter S. The jeweler asked what S stood for. Sawyer didn't answer. He only asked, when will it be ready? 3 weeks. Make it 2. Perfect. Not a single detail wrong. Then he ended the call. 2 weeks passed. Then a few additional days for the final certification. Josie counted each hour. She checked her email every morning, waiting for notice that the ring was complete. And on the first day of the 3rd week, the message arrived. Your order is ready. Please come to the store to collect it. Josie read the email 3 times. Then she set her phone down, closed her eyes, and drew in a long, steady breath. She had waited 15 years for this moment. 15 years since her mother's cold hand placed a silver ring in her palm. 15 years since the whispered promise in a hospital room heavy with antiseptic. And now, at last, she was about to keep her word. That morning she woke earlier than usual. She stood before the mirror in her small Bronx apartment wearing the nicest clothes she owned, a white blouse and black slacks bought on clearance at a thrift store, pressed carefully the night before. Her hair was neatly combed. She wore no makeup because she didn't own any, but her blue eyes held something she rarely saw reflected back at her: hope. She lifted the chain from around her neck, pressed the small silver ring to her lips, and kissed it softly. "I did it, Mom," she whispered to the ring, to her mother, to the 12-year-old girl still alive inside her. "I kept my promise." She looked at herself one more time and smiled. A real smile, a rare one, the kind Sawyer once hinted could light an entire room, though he'd never said it outright. Josie tucked the silver ring back beneath her blouse, picked up her bag, and stepped outside. On the way to the store, she walked as she always did, but her steps felt lighter. October sunlight spilled across the Manhattan sidewalks, and for the first time in a long while, the city seemed beautiful to her. She thought of her mother, of the silver ring, of the diamond waiting for her, of the cup of coffee every night at 9, and the man who didn't know how to stop. She thought that maybe, after 15 years, life was finally softening toward her. She didn't know that 12 hours earlier, at 10 o'clock the night before, in her penthouse office, Mrs. Vivian Ashford had sat before her computer, logged into the store's order management system, located the diamond ring order under the name Josephine Mercer, and erased it completely. She replaced the customer's name with that of a genuine VIP client, altered the order code, and saved the changes. Clean, precise, perfect. The Mercer girl would come to collect her ring. There would be no order under her name. And in front of customers, staff, security, Vivian Ashford would call the police and prove that the small, unprotected jeweler had stolen a piece worth tens of thousands of dollars. Her career would end. Her life would collapse. And the debt of the slap delivered to her son would be paid in full. Josie knew none of this. She walked into Ashford and Laurent with a smile on her lips, her mother's silver ring warm against her chest, her heart filled with the hope of someone about to fulfill the most sacred promise of her life. The system had been altered. The order had been deleted. And Mrs. Ashford was waiting. The sales associate named Lisa was standing behind the glass counter when Josie approached. The young woman smiled, recognizing Josie from the employee break room, and said, "You're here to pick up your order, right? Just a moment." Lisa disappeared into the back and returned 3 minutes later with a black velvet box in her hands. Josie felt her heart pounding so hard she was certain the woman beside her could hear it. 2 years. 15 years. Her entire life narrowed into this single moment. Lisa opened the box, and there it was, resting against the dark velvet, the diamond catching the store lights and scattering them into 1,000 tiny sparks like miniature fireworks. Josie slid the ring onto the ring finger of her right hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her alone. She lifted her hand, tilting it slightly, and for a split second, her jeweler's eye noted that the stone looked remarkably full, possessing a presence far beyond a standard 1.5 carat cut. But her heart, heavy with 15 years of longing, silenced the professional doubt. She simply smiled, the smile she had been saving for 15 years. With her other hand, she touched the small silver ring resting warm against her chest beneath her blouse, and in her mind she heard her mother's voice. "You deserve to wear beautiful things. I did it, Mom." Then Mrs. Ashford's voice sliced through the moment. "What are you doing in the customer area?" Josie turned. Mrs. Ashford stood 3 steps away, dressed in an expensive gray dress, hair pulled into a precise knot, lips painted a sharp red line, but it was her eyes that struck Josie. They weren't cold. They were bright. Bright in a way Josie recognized instantly, but hadn't yet named. The look of a predator watching its prey step cleanly into a trap. "I'm here to collect my order," Josie said calmly. "The diamond ring I placed 6 weeks ago." "Your order?" "Mrs." Ashford arched an eyebrow, her voice loud enough for nearby customers to hear. She stepped to the counter, motioned for Lisa to move aside, and began typing on the computer. A few seconds passed. Then she turned the screen toward Josie. "I don't see any order under the name Josephine Mercer in the system." Josie stared at the screen. The specifications matched. The design was the same. But the name attached to the order wasn't hers. It belonged to a VIP client she'd never heard of. The glossy surface beneath her seemed to tilt. That's impossible. I placed the order through the internal system. I have the confirmation email. Emails can be fabricated, Mrs. Ashford replied evenly. The system doesn't lie, and the system shows that the ring you're wearing belongs to another customer. She lifted her head and raised her voice just enough for the entire showroom to hear. Security. 2 large guards appeared from opposite sides, swift, almost as if they had been waiting for the cue. They positioned themselves on either side of Josie, not touching her, but close enough that she felt contained. Customers began to turn. A middle-aged woman in pearls whispered to her husband. A young couple paused mid-conversation, every gaze fixed on Josie, and she realized that in their eyes, she was already guilty. No trial, no proof. A girl in inexpensive clothes standing in a luxury store, flanked by security, accused by the manager. That was enough. This is a mistake, Josie said, forcing her voice to stay steady. I have proof. Let me get my phone. Don't move, Mrs. Ashford said sharply. The front door opened, and Brody Ashford walked in. The bandage was gone from his hand, though his wrist still moved stiffly as he slid it into his pocket. He looked at Josie, and the smile on his face was the same one from the dark hallway weeks ago. Only now it held no desire, only pure satisfaction at watching prey caught in a snare. I told you, Mom, Brody said loudly enough for everyone to hear. You shouldn't hire people with no background, no family, no one to vouch for them. Who knows what they're capable of? The words cut into Josie like blades. No background, no family, no one to vouch for her. Each phrase was a foster home door closing. Mrs. Whitfield saying they couldn't connect. Her father's back disappearing through the apartment door and never returning. Mrs. Ashford stepped closer, near enough that only Josie could hear her, and whispered in a voice so sweet it chilled. I've waited a long time for this day, Miss Mercer. Did you think you could slap my son in front of others without consequences? I'm very patient, and I always collect my debts. Josie met her eyes, and everything aligned. The deleted order, the altered name, the conveniently positioned guards, Brody arriving at the perfect moment. This wasn't an error. It was a trap, carefully set the night she'd slapped Brody in that narrow hallway, every detail orchestrated, and she had stepped onto the stage exactly on cue. Mrs. Ashford stepped back, raising her voice again for her audience. I regret having to do this, but theft of jewelry worth tens of thousands of dollars is a felony. I'll be calling the police. And Miss Mercer, I advise you to cooperate, because when the police arrive, things could become much worse for you. Josie stood in the center of the store, security at her sides, customers staring with a mix of disdain and curiosity. Brody smirking from the corner. Mrs. Ashford reaching for the phone. Every piece of evidence in the system stood against her. No one in that room was on her side. No one ever had been. She felt the 12-year-old girl inside her curl inward, wanting to cry, to run, to collapse onto the floor, clutching the silver ring the way she had the night her mother died. But Josephine Mercer at 27 was no longer that powerless child. She had survived foster care, survived hunger, survived 15 years alone, and she wouldn't let anyone, take away the one thing she had spent her entire life earning. Josie swallowed her tears, not because she wanted to cry, but because her body reacted before her will could intervene. She swallowed them down along with the fear, along with the echo of the 12-year-old girl inside her, begging her to lower her head, to give the ring back, to run the way she always had. Josie didn't run. She drew in a slow breath, let her shoulders settle, and when she spoke, her voice was so steady it startled even her. You know I didn't steal it. Not a question. A statement. Mrs. Ashford's hand paused halfway to the phone. The system says otherwise, Miss Mercer. The store's system can be altered, Josie replied, meeting her gaze without blinking. Anyone with administrative access can change the name on an order. But there are things you can't alter. She took her phone from her bag. The 2 guards stepped closer, but Josie didn't look at them. She opened her email and lifted the screen high enough for Mrs. Ashford and those nearby to see. Order confirmation, sent from the company server 6 weeks ago. The corporate server, Mrs. Ashford, not the internal management system you can edit. This email exists on an external server. You can't delete it. Mrs. Ashford said nothing, but Josie saw her blink, Quick, almost imperceptible, enough to know she was pressing on the right fracture line. Bank transaction history, Josie continued, swiping to the next screen. Full payment transferred from my personal account to Ashford and Laurent 6 weeks ago. Transaction code. Timestamp. Sender and recipient clearly listed. The bank keeps records for at least 7 years. You can't erase that either. The atmosphere in the showroom shifted. Subtle, but real. A few customers tilted their heads. The woman in pearls glanced at Mrs. Ashford with something other than blind agreement. And there's one more thing. Josie lowered the phone and looked straight at Mrs. Ashford. Security cameras. This store has cameras at every angle, including this counter. 3 months ago, when I placed the deposit for this ring, the cameras recorded me standing here, speaking with staff, signing paperwork, making payment. You can delete a name in the system, Mrs. Ashford. But can you delete the cameras? Mrs. Ashford blinked again, longer this time, and Josie knew she hadn't accounted for that. The trap had been meticulous. The deleted order, the altered name, the staged guards, but the store recorded everything. A brief silence fell. Then Josie turned to the crowd. She knew she was standing among strangers, people who moments earlier had already judged her. She met their eyes one by one. No pleading, no shame. My name is Josephine Mercer. I'm a jeweler at this store. For the past 2 years, I've worked in the back workshop designing and crafting pieces. Some of the jewelry you're wearing right now may have passed through my hands. I'm not a thief. I'm the person who creates what you pay to own. No one spoke, but the woman in pearls unconsciously touched the necklace at her throat, as if considering for the first time who had shaped it. The young couple exchanged a glance. The balance of the room was shifting. Slowly, Mrs. Ashford felt it, and like anyone losing control, she escalated. Enough, she snapped. I don't know where you fabricated those emails or how you manipulated bank records, but I have a responsibility to protect this store's merchandise. Call the police. Now. She nodded sharply to the nearest guard. He pulled out his phone. Josie watched the motion and felt the ground tremble beneath her. Not from fear of the police, but because she understood that in this moment, power sat in Mrs. Ashford's hands. She was the manager. She controlled the system. She commanded security, and Josie had only herself, as always. But herself was enough. She curled her right hand into a fist, the diamond pressing into her palm. With her left hand, she touched the silver ring beneath her blouse. 2 rings, 2 promises. One from her mother, one from herself. Call them, Josie said, her voice steady though her heart pounded against her ribs. Call the police, call the FBI, call anyone you like. I won't take this ring off. I waited my whole life for it, and no one in this world is taking it from me. In the farthest corner of the showroom, where light from the display cases cast a soft shadow, a man sat in a customer chair, legs crossed, wearing dark sunglasses despite being indoors. He was a few years younger than Sawyer, the resemblance clear in the line of his jaw, though his expression was lighter, more inclined to smile. But behind the glasses now, his eyes burned with fury. Paxton Castellano had been sitting there for 20 minutes, his phone angled toward the counter, recording everything. Every word from Mrs. Ashford. Every whispered threat. Every moment Josie stood surrounded. He had heard enough. He pulled out a second phone and sent a single message to his brother. 3 words. Come now, Ashford. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket, adjusted his sunglasses, and continued filming. Because Josie had been cornered. Outside, a black SUV tore through Manhattan streets at a speed that ignored every posted limit. In the back seat, a man sat rigid, jaw clenched, the pale scar along his face stark under passing streetlights. He had just read 3 words on his screen. Then the doors of Ashford and Laurent opened, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees in a single breath. 10 minutes before the store doors opened, Paxton Castellano had called his brother. Not a 3-word text this time, a direct call, because what he had just witnessed over the last 20 minutes made it clear that a message wouldn't be enough. Sawyer answered before the second ring. Speak. Ashford and Laurent. They're accusing your girl of stealing a diamond ring. Mrs. Ashford set it up, deleted the order. Security on both sides of her. Her son standing there smiling. She's alone in the middle of it. Silence on the other end. 1 second. 2. 3. Paxton had grown up around violence. He had seen men die, He had seen his brother do things that would haunt other men for the rest of their lives, but that 3-second silence was more frightening than any gunshot he had ever heard, because it was the silence of a man deciding how much brutality he would carry with him when he stepped through a door. Then Sawyer spoke. Slow, each word deliberate. His voice wasn't cold. It was frozen, the kind of frozen that made even Paxton, who had grown up at his side, feel a chill along his spine. No one touches her. No one says another word to her. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The line went dead. Paxton looked down at the dark screen in his hand and, for the first time in his life, felt something close to pity for the people standing inside that store, unaware of the storm about to break over them. The doors of Ashford and Laurent opened. The small bell chimed as it always did, the most ordinary sound in the world, but what followed it was anything but ordinary. 3 men stepped inside, 2 in front, broad-shouldered, dressed in black suits, hands folded before them, eyes scanning the room with the precision of men trained to identify a threat before it fully formed. And between them, Sawyer Castellano crossed the threshold. The reaction unfolded in sequence, like dominoes falling. The sales associate nearest the door recognized him first. She inhaled sharply, eyes widening, and pressed herself back against the wall. Next came the customers. Those who didn't recognize his face recognized him by instinct, by something ancient in human DNA that distinguishes between ordinary men and dangerous ones. And they shifted aside, unconsciously, like smaller fish, moving away from a shark. The 2 store security guards flanking Josie recognized Sawyer's men first, then Sawyer himself, and the color drained from their faces in a single heartbeat. Anyone who had lived and worked in Manhattan long enough knew that face, that scar, that name. Finally, Mrs. Ashford. She stood by the counter, hand still resting on the phone, mouth half open as if about to say something more to Josie. She turned toward the door. The smile died on her lips instantly. Color fled her face so quickly it was as though someone had switched off a light from within. She knew Sawyer Castellano. She had served the Castellano family for years. She knew what that family meant, what power it carried, what it did to those who chose the wrong side. What she hadn't known until this moment was that Sawyer had any connection to the small jeweler she had just accused of theft. Sawyer didn't look at Mrs. Ashford. He didn't look at Brody. He didn't look at the guards. His eyes found Josie immediately, as though the room contained only her, as though some internal compass had locked onto her long before he stepped through the door. And when he saw her red-rimmed eyes, her trembling hands, the guards bracketing her like she was a criminal, when he saw all of it, something in Sawyer Castellano shifted in a way only those who truly knew him would recognize. His jaw tightened until the muscles stood out beneath his skin. The scar along his left jaw blanched white as blood vessels constricted. His hand curled into a fist, then opened. Curled again. Paxton, watching from the corner, recognized the signal. That was how Sawyer restrained himself. That was how he stopped himself from doing something everyone in the room would regret. Sawyer walked toward Josie. The crowd parted. No one instructed them. No one needed to. They moved aside the way water divides before the bow of a ship, because there are men you see and instinctively clear a path for. And Sawyer Castellano walked with the certainty of someone no obstacle in the world could halt. He stopped in front of her. The 2 guards stepped back immediately, without being told, as if his presence alone erased whatever orders Mrs. Ashford had given. Josie lifted her eyes to him. Her eyes were red but dry. She hadn't let the tears fall, though her body still trembled. And when she saw him standing there, in front of everyone, not hidden, not subtle, here for her, then and only then did a single tear escape before she could stop it. Sawyer raised his hand and gently tilted her chin upward, his thumb brushing her cheek with the care of a man touching the most precious thing he possessed. Josie, look at me. His voice was low, soft, meant only for her, entirely different from the voice that had threatened Donovan on the phone. Entirely different from the tone that commanded violence. This was the voice she alone had heard on a rain-soaked night when he'd said he didn't know how to stop. His thumb wiped away the tear. Then Sawyer Castellano, in front of every customer, every employee, every wide staring pair of eyes in the most luxurious jewelry store on the Upper East Side, bent down and kissed Josie on the forehead. Slow, gentle, reverent, like a vow that didn't require words. The store held its breath. Mrs. Ashford gripped the glass counter for support. Brody's face drained white. No one dared exhale too loudly. Sawyer straightened, his hand still cupped Josie's face. But when he turned toward the room, the warmth vanished from his expression completely. Instantly, without transition, as though someone had extinguished the sun and summoned winter. His dark eyes swept over Mrs. Ashford, over Brody, over the two shrinking guards, over every person who had stood watching while Josie was cornered. Then he asked, his voice light, unhurried, each word separated by a pause long enough for everyone to feel its weight. Who made her cry? It wasn't a question, it was a sentence, and hell opened. Only this time, it wasn't for Josie. No one in the store dared to answer Sawyer's question. The 4 words, who made her cry, hung in the air like the smell of gunpowder after a shot has been fired. And everyone in the room understood that this wasn't a question waiting for an answer, but a warning that someone was about to pay. Mrs. Ashford was the first to speak. She had to be. She was the manager. This was the store she ran. And if she remained silent, that silence itself would be a confession. Mr. Castellano, she began, her voice attempting composure but trembling at the end of each sentence. This is an unfortunate misunderstanding. We had absolutely no idea she was connected to you. If we had known, we certainly would have. Sawyer cut her off. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply spoke, and his words sliced through hers like a blade through paper. Connected to me. That's what you're saying. So if she weren't connected to me, if she were just an ordinary jeweler with no mafia boss standing behind her, then accusing her of theft, surrounding her with security, threatening to call the police, humiliating her in front of customers, all of that would be acceptable? Mrs. Ashford opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She stood there, lips moving, and for the first time since Josie had known her, the powerful manager of Ashford and Laurent looked like a fish dragged onto land, gasping for air and finding none. The ring on her hand, Sawyer continued, lowering his voice another degree, and every time his voice dropped, the temperature in the room seemed to fall with it. Take it off. Read the engraving inside. Read it aloud, so everyone here can hear. Mrs. Ashford looked at Josie, looked at the ring, then at Sawyer. She understood that this wasn't a request. It was an order, and the man standing before her wasn't one she could refuse. She approached Josie with the hesitant steps of someone walking across shattered glass. Josie glanced at Sawyer. He gave the slightest nod. She removed the ring from her finger and placed it into Mrs. Ashford's palm. Mrs. Ashford lifted it toward the light, squinting at the inner band. Read, Sawyer said. Mrs. Ashford swallowed. Her voice was dry when she began. First side. A sequence of numbers. She read the numbers aloud, and Josie, standing beside Sawyer, felt her heart tighten, because those numbers were the date her mother died, the date she had asked to be engraved, a date no imaginary VIP customer would ever have reason to mark. Second side. Mrs. Ashford continued, her voice smaller now, unsteady. You survived. Period. S. Silence. Josie went still. She turned toward Sawyer, her eyes wide, not with fear, not with anger, but with shock. She hadn't known. She had only requested her mother's date. She had never seen the other side. You survived. And the letter S. What did you do? Josie asked softly, her voice trembling now not from fear but from emotion, because she understood in that instant that the man standing beside her had listened on that rain-soaked night, had carried her story quietly in his chest, and had carved into her ring the 3 words she had needed more than anything in this world to hear. You survived. Sawyer didn't answer. He didn't look at her. His eyes remained fixed on Mrs. Ashford, but his hand found Josie's and closed around it, a firm, steady pressure that said more than speech ever could. Then Sawyer took out his phone with his free hand. A few deliberate movements. He turned the screen toward Mrs. Ashford. Original order confirmation email. From the corporate server. Sent to Josephine Mercer 6 weeks ago. External server. Mrs. Ashford. You can't delete it. He swiped. Bank transfer confirmation. Josephine Mercer's account. To Ashford and Laurent. Full amount. Mrs. Ashford stared at the screen as if it were her own death sentence. But Sawyer wasn't finished. From the corner of the room, Paxton Castellano rose from his chair. He removed his sunglasses, and the face behind them no longer carried the easy humor Josie had glimpsed on the rare occasions he'd accompanied Sawyer to the store. His eyes were cold, his jaw tight. As he stepped forward out of the shadows, His shoes struck the veined tiles with a sound that made Mrs. Ashford turn sharply. "And I have this," Paxton said, holding up his phone, screen facing outward. He pressed play. In the absolute silence of the showroom, Mrs. Ashford's voice filled the space. Clear, sharp, undeniable. "I've waited a long time for this day, Miss Mercer. Did you think you could slap my son in front of others without consequences?" Every gaze in the room swung toward Mrs. Ashford, and she, the confident, powerful, arrogant manager, the architect of the perfect trap, the woman who had deleted orders, altered systems, positioned guards, who had stood in this store like a queen dispensing false justice, now stood with an ashen face and the eyes of someone who knew she had just lost everything. "There's more," Paxton added casually, as though discussing the weather. 23 minutes, from beginning to end, including the part where you whisper about revenge. And if your technical department checks the system logs, I'm willing to bet they'll find exactly who logged in at 10 o'clock last night and deleted her order. Systems always keep logs, Mrs. Ashford. Every change leaves a trace. You should know that. Mrs. Ashford opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Not a single word emerged. Brody, in the corner, pressed himself back against the wall as if hoping to disappear. But Sawyer wasn't finished. And Josie was only just beginning. Sawyer opened his mouth, ready to speak the words everyone in the room knew would become a sentence for Mrs. Ashford. But before the first word could leave his lips, Josie tightened her grip on his hand. Not hard, not a pull, just a firm, deliberate pressure that only two people holding hands could feel. Sawyer stopped. He looked down at her, fingers wrapped around his. Then he looked into her eyes, and in those blue eyes he didn't see pleading. He didn't see weakness. He didn't see a woman waiting to be rescued. He saw something that silenced him instantly. Resolve. Josie released his hand and stepped forward. One step, then another, until she stood between Sawyer and Mrs. Ashford. Not behind him, not beside him, but in front of him, facing the woman who had laid a trap to ruin her life. "I don't need anyone to save me." Her voice carried through the silent store. Not loud, not shouted, but clear enough that every person present heard each syllable. "I was standing here before he walked through that door. I was standing here when you called security. I was standing here when your son humiliated me. I was standing here when you threatened to call the police. I didn't run. I didn't kneel. I didn't beg you for mercy. And I don't need a powerful man to walk in and rescue me from you, Mrs. Ashford. Because you're not that frightening." The entire room held its breath. Mrs. Ashford stood 2 steps away, and she looked smaller now. Much smaller than the woman who had stood in this very spot minutes earlier, issuing orders, summoning guards, performing authority before an audience. Each word Josie spoke seemed to pull air from her lungs. "But I do need you to do one thing." Josie stepped closer, close enough to see the sheen of sweat at Mrs. Ashford's temple, close enough to smell expensive perfume laced with fear. "Look at me." Mrs. Ashford glanced at the floor, at the glass counter, anywhere but Josie's eyes. "Look at me, Mrs. Ashford." Josie didn't shout. Her voice simply hardened, sharpened, like steel tempered in fire, and that fire was 15 years of abandonment, of being told she didn't belong anywhere. Mrs. Ashford lifted her head. Their eyes met, and she couldn't look away. Josie's gaze held her in place with more force than any threat Sawyer could have delivered. "Tell me the truth, in front of everyone here. Did you know I didn't steal that ring?" Silence. Long, heavy. The kind of silence where you can hear the hum of fluorescent lights, the whisper of air conditioning, the thud of your own pulse in your ears. Mrs. Ashford opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes darted toward Brody in the corner, searching for reinforcement, but he stared at the floor, pale, unwilling to lift his head. She looked toward the guards, but they had already stepped back, distancing themselves from the sinking ship. No one would save her. No one wanted to. She stood alone, exactly as she had tried to leave Josie moments earlier. "Say it?" Josie didn't move, didn't blink. "I knew." Mrs. Ashford's voice came out in a whisper so faint those farther away could barely hear. But Josie heard. Sawyer heard. Paxton heard. And the customers closest to them heard. And they turned their gaze on the manager with the same judgment they had so quickly cast upon Josie. "You knew," Josie repeated, not because she needed confirmation, but because she wanted every person in that room to absorb it. "You knew from the beginning that I didn't steal it." You knew the ring was mine. You knew I had paid in full. And you still deleted my order. You still arranged security. You still summoned your son to humiliate me. You still threatened to call the police. You did all of it, not because I committed a crime, but because I defended myself when your son harassed me in a dark hallway. Each word landed in the showroom like stones dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward. Customers whispered. Employees exchanged looks. The narrative was turning, from a jeweler accused of theft to a manager staging revenge because her son had been slapped for harassment. And the second truth was uglier by far. You have everything, Mrs. Ashford, Josie said, and her voice shifted again. No longer angry, something deeper, sadder, and because of that, stronger. You have status, power, this entire store, argent, a life others envy. And me? I had nothing. No family, no one protecting me, no one standing beside me. I was the orphan no one kept, no one remembered. She paused. And you still lost. You had everything in your hands, and you still lost to a girl who had nothing but her own hands and a promise to her mother. The store fell so silent the sound of traffic outside drifted faintly through the glass. Mrs. Ashford stood before Josie, and for the first time, she didn't look formidable. She didn't look powerful. She didn't look frightening. She looked small. Exactly what she was. A woman who had used authority to bully someone weaker. And now, faced with that same woman standing upright and unafraid, she had nothing left to stand on. Behind Josie, Sawyer remained still. His arms rested at his sides. He didn't step forward. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was watching her, and in his dark eyes, eyes that had frozen rooms with a glance, there was something entirely different now. Not protectiveness, not concern, but pure admiration. Admiration for the woman standing on her own feet, fighting her own battle, winning with her own strength. But the story wasn't finished, because there was a secret even Mrs. Ashford didn't know. A secret that would turn everything she believed about power in this store into a cruel joke. Sawyer stepped forward to stand beside Josie. Not in front of her. Beside her, shoulder to shoulder. And when he spoke, his voice carried a calm more terrifying than any shout. Mrs. Ashford, I have a question for you. She looked at him with the eyes of an animal that knows it's trapped but still hopes the trap might open. Do you know who owns 50% of this store? Mrs. Ashford blinked. The question lay far outside the battlefield she had prepared for. She had expected threats, judgment, perhaps quiet violence, but a question about shares. She couldn't see where it was leading. Mr. Laurent, she answered, her voice rough. Mr. Laurent owns 50%. He's the founder. Correct, Mr. Laurent is the founder. Sawyer nodded slowly, like a teacher confirming a student's right answer. Before asking the next question, the student will fail. But 6 months ago, Mr. Laurent sold that 50%. Do you know to whom? Silence. Mrs. Ashford stared at Sawyer, and Josie watched the moment understanding dawned. It moved across the woman's face like a crack spreading through glass, beginning with her widening eyes, sliding down to her trembling lips, reaching her hands, which began to shake. He sold it to my family, Sawyer said, each word clear, each word a nail sealing the coffin of her career. I am co-owner of this store, Mrs. Ashford, since 6 months ago. Every diamond in those display cases, every ring, every necklace, half of it belongs to me. Every employee in this store works half for me, including you, Mrs. Ashford staggered back. Her heel wobbled and she had to brace herself against the glass counter to remain upright. Her face had drained of color the moment Sawyer entered. Now it turned gray, the gray of someone realizing the ground beneath her feet never truly existed. You just accused the most talented employee of my store of theft, Sawyer continued, his voice lowering another degree, and Josie felt the air thicken like the sky before a storm. Inside my store, in front of my customers. You deleted data from my system. You used my security to corner one of my employees, and you did all of it for personal revenge. He paused, looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he took out his phone again, dialed, and switched to speaker. The line rang twice. An older man's voice answered, French accent woven gently through English, warm but weary. Sawyer, what is it that you're calling at this hour? Mr. Laurent, I'm at the store. You're on speaker. There are a few people who need to hear you. A brief silence. Then Mr. Laurent said, "I'm listening," Sawyer explained succinctly. No embellishment, no emotion, just facts. Mrs. Ashford deleted an order, falsely accused Josie of theft, staged the incident as retaliation because Josie rejected her son. Video evidence exists. A long silence followed. Then Mr. Laurent's voice returned, completely changed, no longer warm, cold, sharp as a razor. "Vivienne, are you there?" Mrs. Ashford swallowed. "Mr. Laurent, I can explain." "I did not ask whether you can explain. I asked whether you're there." "Yes, I'm here." "Good. Listen carefully. You're terminated. Effective immediately. Your employee badge, your keys, your system access, all revoked before you leave that building today." Mrs. Ashford opened her mouth, but Mr. Laurent wasn't finished. "And Josie." His voice softened when he said her name. "Is Josie Mercer there?" Josie glanced at Sawyer. He nodded. "I'm here, Mr. Laurent," she said, her voice slightly hoarse. "Josie, I told you on your first day that you possess a talent I have rarely encountered in 50 years of this profession. I stand by that assessment. As of today, you're no longer an apprentice. I am promoting you to senior design associate and head of the workshop. You will finally have the creative freedom and the authority you have earned. If anyone should leave that store, it certainly won't be you." Josie stood there, the silver ring against her chest warmer than ever, and for several seconds she couldn't speak because her throat tightened, not with sorrow, but because for the first time in her life, more than one person was standing beside her at once. Sawyer ended the call, turned to Mrs. Ashford one final time. "You have 10 minutes to collect your personal belongings and leave." Then he looked at Brody, who stood hunched in the corner as if he wished to dissolve into the wall. "As for you, you're permanently banned from this store, and the video testimony from employees regarding your harassment will be forwarded to legal counsel this week. I suggest you find a very good attorney." Brody said nothing. He turned and walked quickly toward the door. He didn't look back. Not at his mother, not at anyone. Mrs. Ashford remained standing in the middle of the store for a few seconds longer. She looked around, at the counters she had stood behind for years, at the employees she had commanded, at the customers she had greeted. Something fractured in her eyes. Not remorse. Josie didn't believe she understood remorse. But realization. The knowledge that it was over. She removed her hand from the glass counter, straightened her back, lifted her chin, and walked away. No apology, no backward glance. Her heels struck the cold, white surface one final time. The door closed behind her with a soft chime. Customers began to leave. One by one, pair by pair, quietly, carrying with them a story they would retell many times. If you feel satisfied in this moment, press the like button to let us know, and comment below. In your opinion, is termination enough for Mrs. Ashford, or does she deserve something harsher? The employees gradually returned to their stations, heads lowered, avoiding Josie's and Sawyer's eyes. Paxton slipped his phone into his pocket, put his sunglasses back on, and winked at Josie before stepping outside, leaving space for the two of them. The store emptied. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the front windows, spilling across marble floors, across glittering cases, across the two figures standing side by side in the quiet room. Only Josie, only Sawyer, and a ring waiting to be placed back where it belongs. The store was nearly empty. Only the low hum of the air conditioning remained, and late afternoon sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows, stretching long bands of warm gold across the marble floor. The jewelry cases shimmered beneath their lights, but no one was looking at them now. Josie stood beside the main counter, her eyes lowered to her own hand, her ring finger bare. The ring had been removed when Mrs. Ashford read the engraving aloud, and now it rested on the glass countertop, the 2-carat diamond catching the sun and scattering tiny rainbows across the ceiling. Sawyer stood across from her. He picked up the ring, holding it gently between his thumb and forefinger, tilting it toward the light. Then he turned it inward and pointed to the small inscription, Mrs. Ashford had read before the crowd, but that no one had truly understood. "You survived. S." Josie looked at the words. She had heard them spoken 10 minutes earlier, but she had been in the middle of a storm then, confronting, defending, fighting. There had been no room to feel. Now, in the quiet of the empty store, she looked at those 3 words, and felt them pierce through every layer of armor she had built over 15 years. "When?" she asked softly. Sawyer met her gaze, and this time he didn't deflect, didn't retreat behind silence or a cold mask. "From the night you told me about your mother," he said, his voice low and steady, each word chosen as carefully as if he were placing stones to build something he had never built before. "That rainy night, you were sitting in the workshop holding the silver ring, talking about the hospital, about the promise, about the diamond. You said that diamond would prove you survived." He paused, looked down at the ring in his hand. "I listened to you, and I thought you didn't need a diamond to prove that. Anyone who looks at you, at the road you've walked, from a hospital bed to foster care to that small room in the Bronx to this workshop, anyone who sees all of that already knows you survived, but you needed someone to say it. You needed to see it. So I engraved it inside your ring, into the thing you'll wear every day, so that every time you look at your hand, you won't just see a diamond. You'll see the truth. You survived all of it, alone, and that's the most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed." Josie didn't speak. She stood there and felt something inside her chest, something she had locked away the day her mother died, something each slammed foster door had sealed tighter, something 15 years of loneliness had turned to stone, begin to crack. Not shatter. Crack. Slow. Painful. Warm. Sawyer lowered himself onto one knee on the marble floor. Josie inhaled sharply. He knelt before her, one knee against the cold stone, holding the diamond ring up, his dark eyes fixed on hers, with something she had never seen directed at her before. Not pity, not desire, not protection. Respect. "This isn't a proposal," Sawyer said, his voice steady but gentle. "Not yet. This is me telling you something someone should have told you a long time ago. When you were 12, when you stood alone in an empty apartment after your father walked out, when you were returned the second time, when you were washing dishes at 17 to pay rent. Someone should have said it to you then." He took her left hand and slid the ring onto her finger. Slowly, carefully. The diamond caught the light and cast prismatic colors across both their faces. "You are worthy, Josie. You've always been worthy. Not because I say so. Not because of this ring, but because you are you." And Josie Mercer, the woman who didn't cry when she was falsely accused, didn't cry when security surrounded her, didn't cry when Mrs. Ashford threatened the police, didn't cry when she stood alone against an entire room, the woman who had swallowed her tears and forged them into strength for 15 years, began to cry. Tears streamed down her face. Not a single tear like when Sawyer first walked in, but tears that had waited 15 years. The tears of a 12-year-old girl holding her mother's hand one last time. The tears of a child hiding a silver ring in her sock so it wouldn't be taken away. The tears of a 17-year-old washing dishes at midnight and wondering whether anyone in the world truly wanted her to exist. All of those tears flowed now, because for the first time, someone knelt before her and said, "You are worthy," not with pity but with reverence. Josie grasped the lapels of Sawyer's suit and pulled him to his feet. He rose, and she stepped close, resting her forehead against his. They stood there, forehead to forehead, breaths mingling, and Josie spoke in a voice rough from tears but curved with a smile he could feel even if he couldn't see it. "Don't ever secretly engrave anything on my jewelry again." Sawyer laughed. A real laugh, rare, the kind Josie had never seen on his face. A laugh that softened the scar along his jaw, brightened his dark eyes, made his sharp features look 10 years younger, like the man he might have become if life hadn't forced him into armor made of blood and iron. "Can't promise that," he said. From the doorway came a loud sniffle. Paxton stood at the threshold, sunglasses pushed up on his head, eyes red, rubbing at his nose. He hadn't left, not as Josie had thought. He had stayed, watched everything, and now he tried to disguise his tears with a wide grin. "If word gets out that my brother knows how to smile, the underworld might collapse," Paxton said, his voice attempting casual but still trembling. "Should I call the press?" Sawyer Castellano smiles. Breaking news. "Shut up, Pax," Sawyer said, but there was no coldness in his tone. For the first time, his voice carried laughter. Josie wiped her tears with the back of her hand, looked at the diamond ring on her finger, looked at the silver ring resting warm against her chest, then looked at the man standing before her. She took his hand, not to stop him from speaking this time, but because she wanted to. Sawyer squeezed back. They walked out of Ashford and Laurent, hand in hand beneath the Manhattan afternoon sun, the soft chime of the door ringing behind them. But Josie had one more question. A question she knew would change everything. The black SUV was waiting in the alley beside the store. Paxton opened the door for them, winked at Josie once more, then climbed into another vehicle with the 2 bodyguards. The door shut, and the outside world disappeared. Inside the armored car, every sound of Manhattan was muted. No horns, no voices, only the low whisper of air conditioning, the scent of leather, and the silence between 2 people who had just walked through a storm. The partition between the back seat and the driver was darkened and soundproof. Josie sat beside Sawyer, her hand still in his, but her eyes were fixed on the window, watching Manhattan's buildings drift past without truly seeing them. She was thinking, sorting through everything in her mind, searching for the right question among the thousands turning over each other. "You bought the store because of me." She didn't turn her head. It wasn't a question. It was the way Sawyer spoke when he already knew the answer. Silence stretched across 3 heartbeats. "In part," Sawyer replied. Josie turned to look at him. "What part?" Mr. Laurent wanted to retire. He'd been looking for a buyer for his shares for a while. It was a sound business opportunity. He paused, stared straight ahead, then continued, his voice lower. "But I wouldn't have bought if you weren't there. If it hadn't been the place where you work. If it hadn't been somewhere I could make sure no one had the power to fire you." Josie inhaled slowly, exhaled more slowly. She looked down at the diamond on her finger, the stone catching flashes of streetlight through the tinted glass, and she thought of everything he had done without her knowing. Upgrading the diamond, engraving the words, buying into the store. How many pieces he had quietly moved into place, without boasting, without telling her, without asking her to be grateful. "Sawyer." He turned toward her. "If I step into your world, what am I facing?" He looked at her for a long time, long enough for the car to pass 2 intersections. And when he answered, he didn't soften it, didn't dress it up, didn't try to make it easier to hear. He gave her the truth, the way he had that rainy night in the workshop, because she deserved the truth, even when it was ugly. Danger, real danger, not the kind in movies. There are people who want to hurt me, to overthrow me, to kill me, and they'll target anyone close to me. You'd need protection with you. You won't like that." He paused. "Secrets. There are things I can't tell you. Not because I don't trust you, but because knowing would pull you into things you couldn't walk away from. There will be nights I leave and won't say where I'm going, calls I have to take that you can't ask about." He stopped again, longer this time. "And darkness. I've done things I won't describe to you, not because you aren't strong enough to hear them, but because I don't want to see your eyes change when you look at me." He turned toward the window. "I don't pretend I'm a good man, Josie. I've never been a good man. My father was killed when I was 22, and I did whatever was necessary to keep my family alive. Whatever was necessary. I don't regret it, and that's probably the most frightening part." The car stopped at a red light. Neon from outside spilled into the vehicle, flickering red across Sawyer's face, across the scar along his jaw, across the dark eyes staring outward without focus. Josie studied him. The scar she now understood, the hand resting on his knee, the same hand that had ordered violence, that had held his father's heirloom watch, that had wiped tears from her cheek. "I grew up in foster care," she said, her voice calm, steady, not a tremor in it. "I slept on strangers' floors, ate leftovers, hid my silver ring in my sock because I was afraid someone would take the only thing I had. I've walked through darkness since I was 12, Sawyer. Darkness and I are old friends. Don't ever think it can scare me." She turned in her seat to face him fully. "And I need you to understand something. Listen carefully, because I'll only say it once." He met her eyes. "I'm not something that needs protecting. I'm not a doll you lock in a glass case to keep safe. I'm not a prize you won, or a possession you own. I'm someone who chooses to stand beside you. If I step into your world, it's my decision, not you pulling me in. I walk in on my own feet, with my eyes open, because I want to." She paused. "I've saved myself my entire life, Sawyer. I don't need you to save me. I just need you not to pretend to be someone else when you're with me. Can you do that?" He looked at her, the way he had looked when she repaired his father's watch, when she stood against Mrs. Ashford, when she forced a confession in front of a room full of witnesses. The look of a man accustomed to controlling everything, suddenly recognizing something he couldn't control and didn't want to. Only wanted to stand near. "That's why I love you." He said it plainly. No flourish, no explanation, no music, no candlelight. Just 5 words spoken inside an armored SUV rolling through Manhattan, in the low voice of a man saying the word love for the first time in his life and understanding exactly what it means. Josie didn't answer with "I love you too." Not yet. She wasn't ready for that word. 15 years of mistrust had taught her that trust takes time, and love takes even longer. But she tightened her grip on his hand, and that was enough. "Take me to dinner," she said. "I've been hungry since this morning. I was too nervous to eat. Then I got accused of stealing. Then I cried. I haven't eaten all day, Sawyer." He laughed. The second time that day. A real laugh. Unexpected. Rising from his chest before he could stop it, softening the scar along his jaw, lighting his dark eyes, making the most feared crime lord in New York look like an ordinary man who just heard the woman he loves say something perfectly human and a little absurd. "2 laughs in one day," he said, shaking his head. "A record." He leaned forward and tapped lightly on the partition. The driver lowered the glass. The rooftop restaurant, the one in Midtown. Then he leaned back, still holding Josie's hand, and the black SUV merged into the Manhattan traffic beneath a fading sky. 3 days passed, and the world found out what happened at Ashford and Laurent. The news broke on the morning of the second day. Josie was sitting in the workshop at her new desk, the small plaque that read Senior Design Associate already resting there as if it had always belonged, when her phone began vibrating again and again with notifications from news outlets. Manhattan jewelry store manager terminated after deliberate false accusation against employee. The article didn't name Josie, but it did name Mrs. Vivian Ashford. It described the incident in careful detail. Deletion of system data. A staged theft accusation. Personal retaliation. The source was a video posted online from an anonymous account Josie didn't need detective skills to recognize. Paxton's video spread faster than wildfire, 23 minutes documenting the entire event from beginning to end. By the afternoon of the second day, it had hundreds of thousands of views and thousands of outraged comments. On the third day, another headline appeared: Brody Ashford under investigation for workplace harassment. Kelly, the sales associate who witnessed the slap in the dark hallway that night, was the first to file an official statement. After Kelly, 3 other female employees came forward, describing similar behavior from Brody. Josie read the reports, set her phone down, and stared out the workshop window. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She felt tired, the kind of tiredness that seeps into bone. The exhaustion of someone who has walked through a storm and now stands surveying the debris it left behind. Sawyer didn't come to the store during those 3 days. He didn't call. He didn't appear at her workshop door. He didn't send guards to stand watch. He gave her space. But every night, at exactly 9 o'clock, the hour he used to leave coffee on her desk, a message appeared on her phone. The first night, "Hope you sleep well." Josie read it at 11, lying on her bed in the small Bronx apartment, the diamond ring on her nightstand, the silver ring resting warm against her chest. She didn't reply, but she read it 3 times before turning off the light. The second night, "There's a new pizza place in Brooklyn. It's terrible. I tried it. I want to take you so you can criticize it." Josie read that and almost smiled. Almost. The corner of her mouth twitched, and for the first time in 2 days her face showed something other than fatigue. She still didn't answer. The third night, "I'm proud of you. Not just today. Always." Josie sat on her bed for a long time after reading that one, the phone glowing in the dark. 6 words. No poetry, no declarations, just 6 words. And they reached her deeper than any speech could have, because they came from a man who rarely spoke what he felt, and when he did, each word was solid enough to touch. On the 4th morning, Josie woke early. She stood before the small bathroom mirror, studying the woman reflected there, brown hair slightly disheveled from sleep, faint shadows beneath her eyes from 3 restless nights, blue eyes looking back at her, tired, yes, but carrying something new, or perhaps something that had been there and she was only now seeing. Peace. She lifted her hand and studied the diamond on her ring finger. The stone caught the pale bathroom light, not as brilliant as under showroom lamps, but still bright. still real. Then she looked down at her chest, where the silver ring lay on its chain, dull, small, worth less than $10. 2 rings. The silver one was where she began. A 12-year-old orphan, unwanted, unkept, hiding her most precious possession in her sock so the world wouldn't steal it. The diamond was where she stood now, a 27-year-old woman, head of the workshop. The woman who stood in the middle of a showroom and forced her accuser to meet her eyes and admit the truth. And the engraving inside the diamond ring, "You survived," was the thread binding them together. Child to woman, past to present, pain to strength. Mom was right, Josie whispered to the reflection. I am worthy. And for the first time, she didn't say it as a promise she needed to fulfill. She said it as a truth she finally believed. She remained there a while longer, thinking about the 15 years behind her. 15 years living by one rule: don't need anyone. That rule had saved her. It was armor when no one else stood guard. But now, standing here with her mother's silver ring against her heart and Sawyer's words engraved inside the diamond on her hand, she understood that the rule had done its job. She didn't need it anymore. Not because she had grown weaker, because she had grown strong enough to understand that independence doesn't mean isolation. Strength doesn't mean never being vulnerable. And allowing someone to stand beside her doesn't mean losing herself. It means she's brave enough to attempt the most frightening thing in the world: trust. Josie picked up her phone, opened Sawyer's messages. 3 nights. 3 ways of saying I'm here without invading her space. She typed, "I'll come. Rooftop restaurant tonight." And Sawyer, "Thank you for the engraving." She sent it. 30 seconds later, the phone vibrated. "You don't need to thank me. Just keep surviving. And let me have dinner with you sometimes." Josie smiled. A real smile. Warm, rare. The kind the silver ring had witnessed since she was 12, and the diamond was seeing for the first time. She set the phone down, looked into the mirror once more, and began getting ready for the evening. Josie Mercer stepped out of her small Bronx apartment beneath the Manhattan lights, just beginning to flicker awake. The diamond ring shimmered on the ring finger of her right hand. The silver ring rested quietly on its chain near her heart, and she walked through the city she had called home for 10 years with a lightness in her step she couldn't remember ever feeling before. She didn't know what the future would bring. Sawyer Castellano's world was dangerous, and there would be nights she lay awake wondering where he was, what he was doing, who stood across from him in dimly lit rooms. There would be days when she felt the weight of strangers' eyes, people who knew her name and feared her because of the man beside her. There would be moments when she questioned whether she was walking the right path or stepping into a labyrinth with no clear way out. But tonight, she didn't think about those things. Tonight, on her way to the rooftop restaurant where Sawyer was waiting, Josie thought about a 12-year-old girl curled up on a narrow bed in an empty apartment, clutching a cheap silver ring and whispering into the dark that she would survive. That child kept her promise. Through every slammed door, through every hand that let go, through every voice that said she didn't belong anywhere. That child survived, and now she walked beneath Manhattan lights with a diamond on her hand she had bought with her own sweat and tears. Josie Mercer belongs wherever she chooses to stand. Anywhere. And anyone who thinks otherwise should be prepared, because she has spent a lifetime fighting alone, and now she doesn't have to fight alone anymore. And the man standing beside her. He isn't a good man. He has never pretended to be. But he loves her with everything brutal and tender inside him. With 9 o'clock coffee cups, with secret engravings inside rings, with the way he knelt on marble and told her she was worthy. And sometimes that is enough. Josie Mercer's story ends here. But the lesson she leaves behind does not. That your worth is determined by no one but you. That strength doesn't mean never crying. It means standing up after you do. That independence doesn't mean isolation. And allowing someone to love you isn't weakness. It's courage. If this story touched your heart, press the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they are worthy. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so stories like this can reach you each day. And we truly want to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of someone in your real life? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when no one stood beside you? Share your story in the comments below, because we read every line, and your story matters. Your voice deserves to be heard. You matter. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in each new day. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.